Backstage with Mothership on Solid Rock Radio begins now. Hear the best in new music, artist interviews, stories from the road, and more. You are now backstage, and here's your host, Mothership.
Hey everybody, my guest today is David Zock of Remedy Drive. We met at Loud and Proud in Germany, but it's been a few years.
Nice to see you again.
You too. I want to learn a little bit about you. So let's start at the beginning. When did you pick up an instrument for the first time?
I didn't pick it up because it was too heavy, but it was the piano in my parents' house.
Okay. So you started playing piano.
Yeah, Keith Green was my only jam. Keith Green, and then I grew up at Omaha with Mannheim Steamroller, that instrumental group that most people just know for Christmas music, but they're fresh air stuff.
Yeah.
Then Keith always had those instrumentals like the Prodigal Son Suite. Like seventh grade, I learned that I don't have to read notes anymore. And I could just look at chords, and that's where I really started to enjoy piano.
When did you make the leap to guitar?
I had a little stint with the banjo, which was my introduction to the other kinds of stringed instruments without ivories. But eighth grade, I picked it up, and then freshman year of high school, I went and played in front of the whole student body for the talent show, Disarm by the Smashing Pumpkins.
So you were inspired by a variety of artists. When did you realize that you wanted to be an artist and write music?
I wrote this instrumental piece. I called it My Song, and that was in seventh grade. And then I started writing lyric in ninth grade. And I just thought, this is just something fun to do. Then in college, we started playing some shows, me and my brothers, consistently at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. It was almost like, can we really breathe this out loud? Can we do this for a living? You know, that it slowly snuck up on us. We just loved it so much.
When did you realize this is definitely it? This is what I want to do.
Yeah, and that wasn't until I have a mathematics degree, and we were roofing houses together, and just barely breaking even on roofing houses that took 2 weeks, and then one weekend we netted the same amount of money as we'd netted on a roof that took us 2 or 3 weeks, and we're like, why don't we just figure out how to play concerts every weekend instead of doing roofs all the time?
Were you brought up in the church?
Yeah, my parents are amazing people. They raised us in a very fundamentalist home church network, which means I'm really good at Bible trivia.
But they let you listen to Keith Green?
Well, Keith was pretty funny. He was pretty judgmental and...
Yeah, well, he was very bold with his message, but the music itself, I thought maybe they wouldn't be keen on.
Well, they threw out their rock and roll, all these Stones and Beatles albums when they became Christians. But I listened to Keith on vinyl. I remember in the basement hearing him on vinyl. That was like as much as we could go in that direction. If he was like the most that we're allowed. Like our church services didn't have any instruments at all. But for recreation, instruments were okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It didn't break any rules.
No, it didn't.
Who else did you like back then?
We started listening to acapella. There was a group called Acapella. Yeah. I actually met George Pendergraft. He was in the U2 Rattle and Hum documentary where there's a black gospel church that U2 played. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. I met him at a refugee resettlement thing that I volunteer at here in Nashville. So that was cool to see this vocalist that I saw when I was a kid. But that's when I had to start sneaking in like ninth grade, 10th grade. I started sneaking Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana and Foo Fighters and Stone Temple Pilots. And then discovered U2. Fish was huge for me. Fish and Dave Matthews were huge influences for me.
Wow. Okay. I was a Christian bookstore manager in the 80s.
Oh, wow. So
up until the 90s, they actually had Rich Mullins in our store.
Oh, cool. Rich is one that I wish I could have met.
He was a quirky kind of guy.
The more I hear about him with all his failures and all his quirks and all his oddities, he's probably the most that I connect to in terms of, seeing the world.
I can see that.
I just love all the stories I hear about him. Fun that you're asking this. I have fond memories. 30 years ago, we played, it was me and my younger brother, Philip, and we pulled Paul out of middle school to do another, it was a choir night, and we played Sound of Silence together. And Paul was just, kind of playing along on the drums. So it was me, Phil, and Paul. but it was also me, Phil, and Dan, our older brother. We're still in that fundamentalist network, and so it's kind of frowned upon still, but my parents were kind of pushing the envelope. And then we did those two trios, whether it was the younger brother on drums or the oldest brother on drums, through college. And then the youngest brother had to learn an acoustic guitar eventually. Paul did. We were called Aslan Band, and then just Remedy, and then eventually Remedy Drive.
Wow. When did y'all head the direction of making albums?
We won a regional talent show and got some studio time for, I think, 4 songs, and we made cassette tapes. And we were recording right on to thick tape. And then we would save up money, and we got to go and record in Mannheim Steamroller's studio. And that was,
no way.
Yeah, it was a self-titled album called Remedy. It's a blue album. And that was awesome. There's no click track. There's no metronome, no tuning. Everything was real. And thick tape, once again, it was expensive to record on that thick tape. But still, then we had to, when we got the first CD printed, that was like special for those who remember, like CDs were like cool and brand new. And then we just made 2 more of those just on our own, and then a live album in Lincoln, for the college crowd. And we didn't know what we were doing. We weren't planning on, we didn't even try to book ourselves until one summer I just started sending CDs to like Cornerstone Festival, and I didn't realize that all those things, and labels too, we'd send CDs to labels eventually, and didn't realize that all that stuff just ends up in the trash for the most part. And so we gave up on that and just played shows where we were invited.
Yeah. Your music and ministry transformed when you got involved with humanitarian work. How did that happen?
Looking back at it, I can see moments where my heart was really broken for the way the world is. And one of the big influences for me was a group called Invisible Children. And we would do fundraising concerts at different colleges. This was a few years after we had graduated. I was married by that time. And Invisible Children was an organization that helped expose a warlord that was enslaving children to fight in conflicts. And so the 2000s, and then even when we signed our record deal in 2008, you can see hints of these lyrics I really wanted to get into songs. But nobody liked this idea of talking about child soldiers, talking about refugees and people running from conflicts. It's not hopeful. It's not positive. It's not encouraging. And it's not in any way safe for the whole family to talk about that stuff, especially in music. Right. Why would you want to alienate your audience? There's a woman in a minivan driving her kids to school. She doesn't want to hear about child soldiers or sex trafficking or human trafficking. The labels just push that on me. But at the same time, I watched Dr. King's last speech the day before they shot him. And he says, now is the time for us to develop a kind of dangerous unselfishness. And I looked at the commitment of this man. I looked at Invisible Children. I remembered my mom telling me about Amy Carmichael, who would dye her skin with coffee. And she'd disguise herself. She'd go into temples and rescue 7-year-olds out of forced ritual prostitution.
Wow.
And that story's dormant in me. And then fast forward to 2012, Invisible Children puts out this massive viral YouTube video called Coney 2012. And my daughter's 5. She's crying. And I'm crying. And she says, Dad, why not God protect those boys? And for me, something just clicked, along with all the scripture that instructs us to take the cause of the oppressed and the downtrodden, the marginalized and the exploited. Something clicked for me in that moment with my daughter where I said, I can't do nothing. And so it was just, I really felt propelled into the path that we ended up on.
Wow, that pivotal moment.
Yeah.
A little child shall lead them, right?
That's cool. I didn't think of that. Yeah. I mean, and it was prophetic. It was a prophetic, not in the way that's like foreseeing the future, but it was just this really like it felt the same way I felt when I read the prophet Isaiah or the prophet Amos that says, hey, take a break from singing for a while. Shut up. I'm tired of your songs. I'm tired of your prayers. I'm plugging my ears when you pray because you plug your ears to the cries of the oppressed. Yeah. And there's so many scriptures like that. It was Bono's prayer breakfast speech to George W. in maybe 06. That was a big inspiration for me too. He quoted a lot of those scriptures that, like in Jeremiah, the prophet says he took the cause of the oppressed. Isn't that what it means to know me, says the Lord God Almighty? Mm. And for someone that can crush on a Bible trivia quiz, I had never taken that passage seriously. And for me, all of that, from my upbringing, from my parents teaching me to be selfless, watching the example of my parents loving people more than they could afford to. When my daughter looked at me, I knew that someday she was going to ask me, Dad, you had ability to do something when there were more people enslaved than in any other time in human history. What'd you do? And I want to have a good answer for her.
Your ministry has affected your music. Tell us about your album trilogy.
Yeah, we left our record label, which was, there's a lot of safety and comfort there with the marketing team.
You were with the Word
and then Centricity.
Okay.
Uh-huh. And even this, you'll get a kick out of this. Like, They didn't know what to do with us, right? We're not Disciple, we're not that kind of, level of heavy, and which not that they're heavy compared to a lot of the stuff I'm sure you listen to as well. But we're not, Chris Tomlin. So we didn't fit in anywhere, And so when we got a #1 with Resuscitate at Rock Radio, I actually said a quote that I was so irritated they changed my quote on me. I said something about how we've always been the wimpy kids in the rock scene with our piano rock, and they changed the quote. But that's how I felt. We were just kind of like, there's no real place to put us. And then I wanted to write these songs, and I felt commoditized by the industry as a whole. And I remember one time coming out of a marketing meeting and writing down, I'm not a commodity. I'm a soul inside a body. And that became my anthem that then became the album Commodity that you asked about, which was first in the trilogy of counter-trafficking albums. And I really believe, like I said, that there's something about a melody that can move our hearts in a way that not much else can. Maybe a painting, maybe a documentary with music, but there's something about it that just brings out the goodness. It breathes oxygen on that fire to be right, to be righteous, to take righteous action. And so I thought that would be our response is writing those albums. And it really was in many ways. And that was all through the 20 teens. Those 3 albums came out.
So while you were on tour, you were able to make people aware of the humanitarian crisis and your ministry. Mm-hmm. How did you message that when you had opportunity to speak?
Oh, I like that question. At the beginning, as with all of us, I was a little Keith Greeny about it, a little bit didactic, preachy, maybe guilty, because in this amazing moment of convergence, as I'm leaving the record label to go out and write an indie album that they didn't believe in, a guy who's been a fan of the band since 2008, one of my songs was All Along got him through a really hard time. In 2013, he reached out to me after I'd already left the label and was writing this album. He said, I'm looking for a band to talk about the work our organization does combating trafficking. And so that's how I met Laura and Matt Parker of the Exodus Road. Halfway through that first album, I went overseas with the organization and helped spy on criminal networks that are selling teenagers by the hour. And so came home and rewrote the back half of that album. And so the whole album was informed by real life stories of real teenagers that I met that were being trafficked, and real inspiration from amazing, heroic women and men that were doing frontline work, putting their lives at risk. And so to present it to the audience, to answer your question, I told stories and I tell stories about real life situations that I've been in to invite our audience and anyone that's listening to take some sort of step like I took to use the currency of their lives in the way I'm using the currency of our rock and roll to shine a light on injustice and to take the cause and be a voice for those voices that are being drowned out and hidden.
So first you were made aware, then you supported, but at some point you took this extra step further, and now you actually go in and participate in rescues, arrests in those countries where these things are taking place. How did that happen?
Yeah, I remember specifically, I think in North Dakota, somebody walked up and they had a shirt that said, Sympathy does not equal action.
Ooh.
Then another phrase that hit me was that awareness without action is still apathy. And so, yeah, I said to Matt, I said, man, I'd love to talk about it. Nobody's going to listen to me, though. There's so many people talking about so many things. Can I at least go over and see what you're doing? And so on that first trip, I got trained how to follow people, hopefully incognito, how to use technology that we use to capture evidence of trafficking in really dodgy spaces, back alleys, hotels, clubs, nightclubs, dance clubs, wherever it is that these teenagers are being sold. And a lot of times they're in the establishments, but they're kind of hidden in the back, and it's hard and it's dangerous to find where they're keeping them. And our teams are so brave. Our teams are so persistent at building target packages for law enforcement. So the goal of us going in, a lot of times when I'm overseas, they need to get vital pieces of evidence that's going to make a case stick, because we don't want to just find one girl and run with her. We want to find who's selling them, where they're coming from, and we want to disrupt the whole criminal network, which is hard to do, which takes a lot of different points of contact with these mafias or cartels or criminal networks. And so I'm just one point of contact, setting up hopefully a raid. And I've been part of that a ton. And then I've been there for a few times when we do the raid. And sometimes these raids I'm on, we've spent 6 months of investigations before it happens. One time last year, I got into the country that we were in and met like a 15 or 16-year-old girl. She grabbed me by the arm and took me to this bar, an outdoor bar. And right inside, there were several girls that were younger. So I was like, we're stopping everything, and this is the establishment we're going to focus on. And I had a team of 6 that I was in charge of, 6 Westerners, and then we had 2 Filipino investigators with us. And so we went into that establishment in different groups of 2, 3 or 4 times, and then took that to their federal law enforcement agency called the NBI, National Bureau of Investigation, like our FBI. Showed them the target package. I've learned to edit video because of working in a band. But so I edit video fast. All through that week, I'm just editing video, put it together. You got to get money passes. You got to get all these different pieces of evidence to get them to take action. It was the first time they'd worked with foreigners without having to go and reconfirm the evidence on their own, because our video was so compelling. And we went back, and I paid a bunch of money to this guy, because he thought he had struck gold with us, because there's 8 of us there that final night. And so he had worked in his network. He had all these young girls there. And then I got to watch this guy get arrested, and his place was shut down, and several other traffickers were arrested with him. And these girls come out in, the NBI coats, and they were taken to shelter and aftercare.
Wow. Sounds pretty dangerous, David.
It's sometimes, I don't know if I'm naive, but I just never felt that dangerous, especially when I'm in Latin America. The guys I'm working alongside, they've all seen combat. They're kind of looking out for me. Like when I look back at video, there's one particular friend of mine in Latin America. He always has his hand on my shoulder when we're walking publicly, because we are in some dodgy places, like, I mean, very dodgy places. I always feel like I'm with people that know how to get out of dicey situations quickly, and I don't. I've never said this in an interview. We were part of a raid that there was a international criminal network from a country in Asia, and I was in another country. And so this network was operating in another country, and we're in their bar. And there was like 50 women and girls that were rescued in this particular operation. But when we were prepping, one of the guys from the organization said, hey, and if bullets fly, just hug the walls. And a friend of ours that we recruited at a concert, he was at Special Forces in the United States military, and he's like, boss, don't hug the walls, lay on the floor. Hugging the walls, you're gonna get a ricochet. And there's moments like that where I'm like, man, what am I doing?
Exactly.
Everybody else here.
That's what I'm saying, David.
Yeah. I was like, okay.
Oh my goodness. Are there safe houses for the survivors of trafficking in their own countries?
Yeah, there's safe homes.
Okay.
There are organizations that specialize in aftercare. in trauma therapy, in art therapy, in transitional employment. They give them training, sometimes with actual fake courtrooms, and they help them testify against their traffickers, which is really, really brave.
Wow.
As we got into this a couple years in, well, I've specialized in intervention and rescue and raids. I realized, man, I really care about aftercare too. I care about safe homes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why our band started buying all of our merchandise. Instead of buying cheap t-shirts, we buy really, really expensive t-shirts because they're made by survivors of trafficking, by some of these organizations that are doing the aftercare. And you don't think about it. If you've been trafficked since you're 15, 16, even if you're rescued and you're 20, you don't have a resume. So how are you going to get a job? You know, because trafficking is so subtle. An employer might think, oh, this girl was obviously just a streetwalker. I'm not gonna hire her. And so what's really beautiful about these organizations that give transitional employment and resumes, and then one organization in particular, Agape International Mission in Cambodia, they have a culinary arts facility where these girls are trained in cooking. Some of these girls come out and graduate from the program, and they have ways to integrate them into actual employment afterwards.
Fantastic. There's a quote I like that I saw on your website, and it said, "Justice is in the hands of the ordinary." Could I get you to elaborate?
Yeah, that's from all the way back in 2014 when I joined up with the Exodus Road, and that was their phrase. And that idea that ordinary human beings like you and I have a chance through seemingly insignificant actions to impact real change. It'll always seem insignificant. Even all this, I can imagine somebody thinking, no, he doesn't really mean that. But everything I've done, it doesn't seem like it's significant. It seems so small. Like I have a water pistol and I'm pointing it at a forest fire. And there's this audacity to that mindset. And going back to what you said about my daughter, you know, out of the mouths of children, that audacity, I think, is most exemplified in a child in front of a hillside of thousands of hungry people at one of Jesus Christ's public speaking engagements. Everybody's hungry. All the adults are saying, hey, let him go home. And the kid comes up to Jesus Christ and says, hey, here's my lunch. Maybe this can help.
There you go.
And so justice is in the hands of ordinary people. My 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, that's all I got. What am I going to spend it on? What am I going to invest it? And I've watched over and over again the privilege of my life to see ordinary human beings step into these extraordinary roles in the arena of freedom and justice. And I've watched those 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish be lifted up by the Creator and blessed. And then I've watched it multiply. It's been thrilling.
Amen. Well, we're going to switch gears, and I want you to tell us about your latest album.
Our newest album was after that trio of trilogy of counter-trafficking albums. I just wanted to just write some songs that weren't so heavy. And I was dealing with what everybody deals with when the kids don't think you're as smart as you were. You know, I got a 14-year-old daughter, and my son's going to college. It was right before he left for school. So scars to prove it. You've got my love, and you can't lose it. I've got the scars to prove it. The cover of it, if you look at it closely, you'll realize it's my son's 1988 Bronco 2. And just knowing that he's heading off into the world and there's going to be things that I can't protect him from. And then there's elements of the same longing for justice and looking for light. I was really inspired, as I have been all the time. You know my friend Mary Nickel.
Oh, yes.
We're fellow nerds. She's more of a nerd than I am when it comes to Gandalf and Lord of the Rings. And we talk about these heavy things, whether it's wishing there was less apathy in our culture, but then looking at, you know, there's wars, there's slavery, there's so many things that are busted. And when Galadriel from The Lord of the Rings, she said something along the lines of, like, she knows with confidence that there's this bright hope, this bright light beyond the reach of shadow. For her to say that, the entire thing is covered with this darkness, and she still says there's hope. And Gilastel is a song on her new album, which means the star of high hope. And this belief that there's this incorruptible goodness And this is a quote from a Russian poet. He said, if this great evil that for all of humankind, all these thousands and thousands of years is trying to take away that goodness, that brightness, that light, and has failed for this long, why should we ever fear that darkness is ever going to prevail? I shine this candle in the darkness. There's nothing the darkness can do about my candle. It doesn't have a chance to combat if we shine our small lights. And so I got this little light, and I'm okay with not fixing all the world's problems. I'm going to shine my light. That's all I can do.
Amen. Well, that sums up the whole album.
Yeah, that flows in and out through every song, those concepts.
Wow. Is there one particular one that has hold of your heart?
Oh, for sure the title track. It's about my daughter. Radiant light, where have you gone? Static noise drowns out your song. Undertow, it steals your glow. You get caught up in the riptide. Your fire's been eclipsed by a shadow force. It's got you off the course. When tired is the foot that slips, you got my love, and you can't lose it.
What a poet. That's great.
And this is the first interview of the year, and I honestly haven't done almost any interviews for Scars. I will say this, Scars to Prove It is the first album that I produced, and it's the first album that I mixed. And mixing, I always thought was just like turning the vocal up or down, turning the guitar up or down. It's way more of an art form, and I got to spend several months just learning that art form for this album.
How did that feel?
Oh, well, you're not supposed to produce your own album. You're not supposed to mix your own album for sure. You're not even supposed to mix the album that you produced if it's not your album. But I broke all those rules just because I really, really wanted to.
Why not?
Yeah, so if it sounds too much like David Zock, that's why.
All right, fam. Y'all run over to his website and get some music and a shirt to support the victims of trafficking. You've got things besides the shirts, though, too, right?
Not only our T-shirts are made by survivors of trafficking, they have bracelets, kimonos, elephant pants, boho pants. They're special, they're exotic, and then they're a great story for people to tell. You know, people can say, oh, I love your pants. Oh, yeah, here's the story of them.
All right, y'all run over to the website and place an order.
Yes, and my wife will package it up and send it right over to you.
Awesome. Now, when this airs, you're going to be several dates into a tour. Tell us a little bit about that.
January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, so it's a combination of some rock and roll shows, some living room concerts. I'm speaking at several universities about trafficking, and then we're doing a really cool event in Colorado Springs where we get to share up close some of the stories of raids and rescues. No phones allowed, no footage allowed. So some actual footage that we can't put online or anything like that of some of my friends whose faces have to stay hidden all the time that do this work. And then we're still booking. It always feels like we're behind the eight ball and we get a couple shows booked. We don't get the shows booked around them. Mm-hmm. So we're doing a thing where anybody that wants to have us come play in their living room, if we can make it work, between rock and roll days, we'll come bring the acoustic guitars or a piano in and do an intimate songs and stories. So going through the spring and into the summer, like that's a new part of touring that I really enjoy. Like I love the workout and run around on stage, but as my hair gets grayer, it's nice to have a night off and just have an intimate time in a living room. Completely
different vibe.
Yeah.
Who do you have touring with you?
Remedy Drive right now is in a really fun spot. Dave Moore, who played guitar with us for a long time, plays bass. We go out as a trio. My brother Philip sometimes plays bass, and Corey Horn sometimes plays bass. Then on drums, Timmy Jones is our drummer, provided that he's not doing his tent-making gig playing drums for Chris Tomlin. And if Timmy's not out, we have Tim Buell and a couple other guys that come out with us too. So we're kind of a collective, but I don't want anybody to quit the band. Everybody's still part of it, you know?
Yeah. Whosoever will may come, right?
Exactly, yeah. And every now and then we played Denmark. We played as a 4-piece again. My dream is to record as a 5-piece.
Wow.
And have different people switch around depending on what song it is.
Well, David, what you're doing is amazing, and I appreciate your ministry so much.
I am so glad that I finally got to talk to you. I see all my friends talking to Mothership, hanging out with Mothership, and I've felt left out, and now I'm included in the group, and it feels special to me.
Oh, that's sweet.
This has been a blast.
It was a blast and a blessing. Have a good night.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more great music. And don't forget to check out my blog page on the Solid Rock Radio website for my guests' official social media links. And hey, did you know you can listen to all Backstage with Mothership interviews on your phone through the Solid Rock Radio app or on all major podcast platforms? Back episodes are also available on YouTube and TikTok. Have a wonderful week, and let's be kind to one another.